The Portraits of Coventry are a collection of paintings by artist Andy Farr. Each one tells the story of someone who lives in the city. Some were born in Cov, others came to find work or sanctuary. The paintings were created in 2021 based on conversations Andy had with each of the participants earlier in the year. The project was funded by Orbit Housing as part of City of Culture. In 1987, when Coventry won the FA Cup final, Steve was there. He still got the scarf and the ticket. Steve witnessed Keith Houchen's amazing diving header that took the score to 2-2 before City won in extra time. The city was then enveloped in celebrations following the Sky Blues' victory, the one and only time in the club's history. Steve had spent his life in the city, born just off the Gulson Road. Sadly, he was an early victim of the decline in Coventry's car industry in the early 80s. Steve is a mine of information about Coventry's past. His recollections reach all the way back to include those of his father, who remembered seeing Laurel and Hardy perform at the Hippodrome, now the site of the Transport Museum. Steve is a talented musician, inheriting his father's musicality, and modestly mentioning his grade 7 piano almost in passing. For Steve's painting, Andy wanted to immortalise the 1987 FA Cup victory. The painting features a Roy Lichtenstein-inspired pop art version of that goal, alongside Steve sporting his treasured FA Cup final scarf, and the score from his favourite piece of music, The Dream of Olwen, composed by Charles Williams. Trevor and Val have created a community garden at Shortwood Court and told Andy about some of the plants that will flower there throughout the year, and these are featured in the painting. They've been involved with many community-related projects, including the establishment of Coventry's first community fruit and veg shop, Tutti Frutti. But Trevor hasn't lived all his life in Coventry. In the late 70s he worked in West Berlin and was a regular visitor through the checkpoints into East Germany. As he says, interesting but scary times, and woe betide anyone who took a camera across with them. On the night of Thursday the 14th of November 1940, a bright moonlit night, the city of Coventry was bombed into ruins over a sustained 11-hour period. An estimated 568 people were killed that night, and Coventry lost its great medieval cathedral, its central library, market hall, hundreds of shops and public buildings, and much of the city's industry was destroyed. That night Rini was sheltering only half a mile away from the cathedral in the cellar of the Golden Cup pub on Far Gosford Street. She's recently celebrated her 90th birthday, and her memories of Coventry include the sadness of the Blitz, but also celebrations of VE Day, the coronation, and times when the Queen visited Coventry. Rini worked for a variety of companies in Coventry from the age of 14 when she started work operating machinery, through to when she worked at the Walsgraves Hospital in CSSD, sterilising the, as she said, instruments of torture. Andy's painting of Rini includes references to that night during the Coventry Blitz, as well as her 90th birthday, which she celebrated during the social distancing of lockdown. Frances was made in Coventry. Her mother came to Coventry during World War II from Glasgow, along with her sister to work, and trained to become a skilled machinist. Her parents met while working at factories after the war. Frances grew up in Willenhall and remembers the precinct where you could buy everything you needed. It was like a village. Everyone knew everyone. Singing is now an important part of Frances's life, but it wasn't always the case. She overcame her fear of singing in front of others with the help of her late friend Maureen and a confidence course. She's been a member of several Coventry choirs: Young at Heart, One Voice, Co-op Ladies Choir, Rock Choir, Willenhall Community Choir, and Gospelability Choir, who performed at the Coventry Cathedral. In creating Frances's painting, Andy decided to build into it the image of one of the choirs she'd sung with at Coventry Cathedral, singing in front of the iconic baptistry window. He wanted to convey the sense of joy that singing gives to Francis and to others. The image of the Gospelability Choir is used with permission from Sandra Godley. Colin moved to Coventry during its industrial heyday in the early 70s. He was an industrial radiologist for Alvis, X-raying engine casings with machines many times more powerful than those used in hospitals. When Colin arrived in the city, it was still a very engineering-orientated place, with a vibrant manufacturing sector producing cars, bikes, watches, chemicals, textiles, aircraft components and armoured vehicles. As Colin says, the wages were high and the opportunities were immense. Colin has many ongoing interests, with involvements in the university as a part-time lecturer, with singing groups, as a church warden, and with theatre. His love of theatre dates back to Coventry, when he used to visit from Birmingham for pantomimes, and later in life becoming involved in an over-50s drama group. For the painting, Andy combines Colin's love of theatre, using a photograph taken by BBC CWR of Colin holding a skull in a Shakespearean pose, alas poor Yorick, with an industrial X-ray linking to his engineering background. Dot was born in Coventry on Little Park Street in 1935. She told Andy about many of the events she'd witnessed over the past 80 years. Her father's lucky survival of the bombing of Coventry Hospital in 1941. He'd been moved to Kersley the day before because of scarlet fever. She remembers dancing at the Locarno in the Hippodrome and running with the Godiva Harriers, and later managing a hotel in Blackpool. But one strand that stood out was the family's connection to Triumph motorcycles. Dot's grandfather worked for Triumph when they were based on Clay Lane before the war. And then her father, husband and two brothers-in-law all worked for them when they moved to Meriden. In 1973, the owner, Dennis Poor, decided to close the business to build houses on the site. Dot, and particularly her brother-in-law, Dennis Crowther Johnson, were central to the campaign to save the factory. The workers staged a 2-year sit-in and eventually, helped by the government, set up Meriden Workers Cooperative to buy the factory and market the Triumph motorbikes they produced. The factory was supported by actors Steve McQueen and Richard Gere, who visited in the mid-70s. Dot told Andy about a march to Parliament seeking support, and this features in the painting. Whilst the factory closed, ultimately, a new company, Triumph Motorcycles Limited, gained the rights to the name and has been successfully building bikes in Hinckley since 1988. Dot's family connection continues as one of her sons works for a Coventry business manufacturing components for Triumph. Liam moved to Coventry as a child during the war from Ireland, and in the 1970s he became an amateur boxer, a period when most of the major companies in the city had a boxing section. One of Liam's opponents was Tony Golden Boy Walsh, who was later to become a wrestler during the heyday of British wrestling, and it was a staple of Saturday afternoon TV. After ending his boxing career, he took up Crown Green Bowls, reaching the All England finals. He was married for 55 years to Mary, who sadly passed away 7 years ago. Liam still talks to her every day and mourns her passing. More recently, Liam has become a writer, and he shared one of his pieces with Andy.
Lo, the darkness soon returns, and tales of valour then recede. Life calls for desperate measures, where heartfelt wishes are made, and we realise there are questions that should not be asked, doors that should not be opened. My hands are shaking, my heart is breaking, but I shall still sing songs, I shall still drink wine, and walk this land with compassion, and be true to my cause, wherever it may lead.
Andy's painting is based on Liam sitting in a reflective pose outside at Park View. Capturing Liam's tattoos was an important part of the image. As well as his wife and daughter's names, he also has one that dates back to 1954, created by Jessie Knight, Britain's first female tattooist. Alongside this painting, Andy has also created one based on an archive picture of Liam from the 1970s. Bilo came to Coventry 15 years ago, seeking sanctuary. He was fleeing Guinea in fear for his life after being involved in protests against the oppressive regime. Bilo describes Coventry as a fantastic place, but nonetheless his life still has tensions and struggles, both within his community and fighting the enduring sense of loss from his family who are still in Guinea. With Bilo's painting, Andy wanted to represent both the connection back to his heritage and family in West Africa and the life that he's now building in Coventry. The shapes and colours in the background are based on fabric patterns on his sister's dress, taken from one of the very few pictures he has of her, and from a belt she gave him before he had to leave. A belt that represents the ties back to his culture. These are combined with the moving blue of Coventry, representing Bilo's journey from Africa. When Andy first talked to Roz, she described how her family had moved to Birmingham from Uganda in the 1970s, and then how for family reasons she'd needed to find a place of refuge. Coventry, with help from Orbit, became that place of sanctuary. Roz moved here in the 90s with 3 young children and made a new life for them all. After the easing of lockdown, Andy was able to meet with Roz in her home. He felt that her bookcase was an amazing encapsulation of many of the things that Roz had experienced, and of the new life she'd been able to build. It reflected on so many aspects of her life: interest in books and films, geography and ecology, cooking and home, sport and games. It contained mementos, cards and photographs of her son's rescue dog. But most important of all, pictures of her with her family. One of the items on the shelf reads, "Family is not an important thing. It is everything." And that seemed to say it all. In Andy's painting, he sought to convey the richness and depth of Roz's life, her interests, the warmth and expressiveness of her persona, but also a reference to some of the darker times that she'd endured. Angela was a nurse for over 40 years. She trained in London at the end of the 50s, and while nursing hours didn't give her much free time, she remembers seeing Bill Haley, Cliff Richard as an 18-year-old, Adam Faith and the king of rock and roll himself. She moved to work at the Waldegrave Hospital in Coventry after she got married. She was an expert phlebotomist, otherwise known as a bleeder, so she was experienced at inserting needles. Angela is one of 3 generations of nurses. Her mother was a midwife, and her daughters then followed her into nursing. It was this family connection to nursing that is the inspiration for Andy's painting. The painting includes a picture of Angela with her mother, taken just after she'd been made a sister, and one of her daughters in their uniform. Daksha is a force of nature, an active community organiser with a particular focus on the area around Foals Hill. Her family moved to Coventry in 1972 as a result of the expulsion of Asians from Uganda by Idi Amin. Her father drew upon his expertise as a gold and silver miner to work at Kersley Colliery. They moved into Jackson Close, where the family was embraced by the community, despite tensions in some other areas of the city. Times became harder after the death of her father when she was only 11, a time when Coventry started to feel like a dark and dangerous place for her. Daksha developed a level of inner resilience and independence that continues to be present in all her activities. This was one of the things that Andy wanted to capture in his painting. The painting shows cosmopolitan influences that had helped to shape who Daksha is today. Its background is based on the pattern on a pocket square of her father's. Combined with the vibrant yellow of her favourite sari, a pendant from her Nana Ma, Hindu ankle bells alongside Daksha herself wearing Western clothes, and overlaid with elements from a mural in Foals Hill created by one of the community groups she helps to organise and inspire. Andy was struck by John's passion, a real passion for enabling people to support and help themselves, as well as a passion for music and bands. Music was one of the main reasons John came to Coventry in 1983 to attend the then Lanchester Polytechnic, now Coventry University. After finishing his degree, John stayed in Coventry. He got a job working in vocational guidance, a role which evolved after the Labour government came into power. In 1998, they introduced a groundbreaking initiative called Tackling Drugs to Build a Better Britain. It was the first time any government had brought together the agendas of employment, health, criminal justice and housing. A partnership comprising the NHS, drug team, probation, DWP and Orbit Housing. As John says, you can't tackle drug misuse in isolation. You've got to have that joined-up approach. After 3 years, John became manager of this unit, a service that genuinely helped many people in Coventry and Warwickshire to secure work and training. Sadly, from 2012, subsequent governments failed to continue the project, and funding to drug services was significantly cut. Orbit Housing were involved in providing support at the time of the initiative, which was where he first encountered them. John is now a manager in one of Orbit's independent living schemes. When John talked to Andy about the bandsit scene and the work he'd done, he was standing in front of a gig poster for Echo and the Bunnymen. This gave Andy the idea of creating a painting that stylistically resembled a band poster. The painting makes use of Coventry's Moving Blue and features the names of the bands that John had seen live and some of the words he used when talking about his life and work in Coventry.